The dry desert wind whispered across the barren plains of Colorado Territory. 1876, carrying with it the scent of death and the promise of salvation that Rebecca Owens had long stopped believing in. Her parched lips cracked as she stumbled forward, one trembling hand pressed against her burning chest, the other clutching the tattered remnants of her once fine traveling dress. The consumption that had driven her west in search of healing air had worsened on her journey, leaving her stranded when the stagecoach driver refused to carry a woman coughing blood. Rebecca paused, swaying like a willow in a storm, her lungs betraying her once more as she doubled over. The coughing fit tore through her body, each spasm more violent than the last, spraying crimson droplets onto the dusty earth. Her knees buckled beneath her, the world spinning in a kaleidoscope of azure sky and golden plains. She had 23 years of life behind her and perhaps only minutes ahead. In the distance, through tear-blurred vision, she saw a silhouette emerging from the heat haze. A rider, tall in the saddle, approached at an unhurried pace. Rebecca tried to call out, but her voice had abandoned her. The rider drew closer, and she could make out a broad-shouldered man with sun-bronzed skin beneath a worn leather hat. His stallion's hooves kicked up dust that danced in the late afternoon light. She coughed again, blood spattering the ground as her strength finally gave way. The last thing Rebecca saw before darkness claimed her was the rider dismounting, concern etched into features that seemed carved from the very mountains looming in the distance. Daniel Evans had been tracking a wayward steer when he spotted the woman. At first he thought she might be a mirage, a trick of the merciless sun on a weary cowboy's eyes. But as he drew closer, the sound of her desperate coughing confirmed her reality. He'd seen consumption before it had taken his mother when he was 12 and recognized the telltale signs immediately. "Madam," he called, swinging down from his saddle. When she collapsed, he rushed forward, kneeling beside her crumpled form. Her skin burned with fever beneath his calloused fingers as he checked for a pulse. It fluttered weakly against his touch, like a wounded bird struggling to stay aloft. Daniel glanced around, squinting at the empty landscape stretching in all directions. His ranch lay 10 miles to the north, the nearest town 15 miles south. Decision made, he gently gathered the unconscious woman in his arms, surprised by how little she weighed, as if the illness had already consumed much of her. "Don't you worry now," he murmured, though he doubted she could hear him. "I've got you." With practiced ease, Daniel mounted his horse, cradling the woman against his chest. He settled her securely before him in the saddle, one strong arm wrapped protectively around her waist while the other held the reins. Her head lolled against his shoulder, dark curls escaping from a once neat bun. "Let's ride, Thunder," he urged his horse. "Easy now." The stallion set off at a gentle trot, careful with its dual burden. Daniel felt the woman's body shake with another coughing fit, even in unconsciousness. He tightened his grip, holding her steady as they rode toward the Double E Ranch, his family's land for 2 generations. As they crested a hill overlooking the valley that held his home, Daniel surveyed his kingdom with the eyes of a man who knew every rock and tree. The modest ranch house stood sturdy against the wilderness, smoke curling from the chimney where Mrs. Potts, his housekeeper, would be preparing supper. The barn and corral stretched to the east, and cattle dotted the grasslands beyond. "Almost there," he told his silent companion, urging Thunder forward. Mrs. Potts emerged from the house as they approached, her weathered face registering first surprise, then concern at the sight of Daniel carrying the unconscious woman. "Land sakes, Mr. Evans, what have you brought home now?" She called, hurrying across the yard, found her collapsed on the south range, Daniel explained, carefully dismounting while supporting Rebecca. "Consumption, I reckon. Bad case." Mrs. Potts's expression softened. At 62, she had seen more than her share of the disease. "Bring her inside." "I'll ready the guest room." Daniel carried Rebecca through the doorway, her body seeming to grow lighter with each step. The ranch house was modest but comfortable, with sturdy furniture built to last. Mrs. Potts bustled ahead, throwing open the door to the guest room and turning down the quilt on the bed. "Lay her down gentle now," she instructed, moving to light the lamp on the bedside table. Daniel placed Rebecca on the clean sheets as if she were made of china. In the lamplight, he got his first clear look at her face. Despite the pallor of illness, he could see she was beautiful, with delicate features and long, dark lashes resting against her cheeks. "She's burning up," Mrs. Potts said, laying a hand on Rebecca's forehead. "I'll fetch water and clean cloths. You send Jimmy for Dr. Wilson." Daniel nodded, reluctant to leave the mysterious woman but knowing the urgency of the situation. He strode outside to find his young ranch hand, Jimmy Parker, leading Thunder to the stable. "Jimmy, ride to town and fetch Dr. Wilson. Tell him it's urgent, young woman with consumption, high fever." "Yes, sir," Jimmy replied, already moving toward the freshest horse in the stable. At 17, the boy was eager to prove himself, and within minutes he was galloping toward town. When Daniel returned to the guest room, Mrs. Potts had removed Rebecca's dusty outer garments and covered her with a light sheet. She was bathing the unconscious woman's face with cool water, her movements gentle and practiced. "Poor thing," Mrs. Potts murmured. "Traveling alone by the looks of her. She's got quality clothes, though worn from the journey." Daniel noticed a small locket around Rebecca's neck, gold catching the lamplight. "Any idea who she might be?" "None. No papers that I found, though there's a small valise tied to her belt. Haven't looked through it, yet didn't seem right while she's unable to give permission." A fresh bout of coughing seized Rebecca, her body convulsing as Mrs. Potts quickly turned her to the side. Blood stained the pristine pillowcase, and Daniel felt a pang of something unexpected, not just pity, but a fierce protectiveness that caught him by surprise. "Will she make it till the doctor comes?" he asked quietly. Mrs. Potts's lips thinned. "Hard to say. I've seen consumption take strong men in days and frail women survive for years. All we can do is make her comfortable and pray." Daniel was not a praying man, hadn't been since his father died in a cattle stampede 5 years ago, but he found himself hoping with an intensity that startled him. This stranger had stumbled into his life, and somehow, inexplicably, he couldn't bear the thought of her stumbling back out again. "I'll sit with her," he offered. "You go prepare some broth in case she wakes." Mrs. Potts raised an eyebrow but nodded, patting his arm as she left the room. Daniel settled into the chair beside the bed, watching the rise and fall of Rebecca's chest, each breath a victory against the disease ravaging her lungs. As night fell across the Colorado territory, casting long shadows through the window, Daniel found himself talking to the unconscious woman. He told her about the ranch, about the cattle drive planned for the following month, about Thunder's peculiar habit of stealing apples from the orchard. His deep voice filled the quiet room, offering a lifeline to the woman adrift in fever dreams. "Don't you give up now," he murmured as she stirred restlessly. "You made it this far. That shows you've got grit, and grit counts for a lot out here." Around midnight, Rebecca's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of summer sage. Confusion clouded her gaze as she tried to focus on Daniel's face. "Where?" Her voice was barely a whisper, broken by a soft cough. "Double E Ranch," Daniel answered, leaning forward to offer her water. "I found you collapsed on the range. I'm Daniel Owens. The ranch is mine." Rebecca accepted a few sips of water, each swallow visibly painful. "Rebecca Owens," she managed, "thank you for your kindness." "No need for thanks, Miss Owens. Anyone would have done the same." A ghost of a smile touched her pale lips. "Not anyone. The stagecoach driver left me." Her eyes began to close again, the effort of speaking exhausting her limited strength. "The doctor's coming," Daniel assured her. "You just rest easy." "My things," she murmured. "Safe," he promised. "Everything's safe here." Rebecca slipped back into unconsciousness, but Daniel felt lighter somehow, having heard her voice, knowing her name. Rebecca Owens. He rolled it silently on his tongue, watching over her through the long night hours. Dr. Wilson arrived before dawn, his buggy clattering into the yard. The elderly physician had been serving the area for 30 years, his skills honed by frontier necessity. Daniel met him at the door. "Where's the patient?" Dr. Wilson asked, medical bag in hand. Daniel led him to the guest room where Mrs. Potts had maintained her vigil after insisting Daniel get some rest. The doctor's examination was thorough, his weathered hands gentle as he listened to Rebecca's lungs and checked her fever. "Consumption, sure enough," he confirmed grimly. "Advanced, but not hopeless. The dry air out here might help if she can overcome this acute spell." He began preparing medications from his bag. "She'll need constant care, clean bedding, good food when she can take it, fresh air but no drafts." "She'll have it," Daniel said firmly. "Doctor." Wilson glanced up, a knowing look in his eyes. "It's a long recovery, Evans. Months, maybe longer, and no guarantees." "I understand. Do you? This isn't like nursing a sick calf. This disease can spread. It's risky, especially for Mrs. Potts at her age." Daniel straightened, his jaw set. "She stays, doctor. I found her. She's my responsibility now." The doctor sighed, recognizing the stubborn set of the rancher's shoulders. "Very well. I'll leave medicine and instructions. I'll return in 3 days, sooner if there's a change." After the doctor departed, leaving behind vials and detailed care instructions, Daniel returned to Rebecca's bedside. In sleep, pain had smoothed from her features, making her look younger, vulnerable in a way that stirred something protective in his chest. "What's her story, do you reckon, Mrs. Potts asked, arranging the medicine bottles on the bedside table. Daniel shook his head. "Don't know, but I aim to find out when she's stronger." "She had this in her hand," Mrs. Potts said, holding out a crumpled letter. "Fell out when I was changing her clothes." "Didn't read it, but the envelope's addressed from Boston." Daniel took the envelope, noting the fine quality of the paper and the elegant handwriting. He placed it beside the small valise they'd removed from Rebecca's belt, determined to respect her privacy despite his growing curiosity. Over the next few days, Rebecca drifted in and out of consciousness. During her lucid moments, Daniel or Mrs. Potts would help her sip broth or take her medicine. She was too weak to speak much, but her eyes followed Daniel whenever he was in the room, communicating a gratitude that needed no words. A week passed, then another. Spring edged toward summer, bringing longer days and the first wildflowers to the ranch. Rebecca's fever broke, though the coughing continued to rack her frail body. Dr. Wilson visited regularly, expressing cautious optimism at her progress. "She's fighting," he told Daniel. "Got more strength than I gave her credit for." As Rebecca gained strength, her personality began to emerge. She was educated and well-spoken, with a dry wit that surfaced between bouts of coughing. She apologized constantly for the trouble she was causing, despite Daniel's assurances that she was welcome for as long as she needed. One evening, as Daniel sat reading to her from a dog-eared copy of The Last of the Mohicans, Rebecca gathered the courage to share her story. "I was a teacher in Boston," she said, her voice stronger than it had been, though still fragile. When the consumption was diagnosed, the doctor suggested the dry air of the West might help. Daniel set the book aside, giving her his full attention. The lamp cast a warm glow over her face, bringing color to cheeks that had been too pale for too long. "My parents died when I was young," she continued. "I have had an aunt in San Francisco who offered to take me in. The stagecoach was supposed to take me all the way, but when my coughing worsened." She looked away, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "The driver said I was scaring the other passengers. He left me at a way station, but I couldn't stay there. I thought I could walk to the next stop. Foolish." "Brave," Daniel corrected. "Desperate maybe, but brave." Rebecca's smile was tentative, like spring sunshine after a long winter. "I haven't thanked you properly. You saved my life, Mr. Evans." "Daniel," he insisted. "And no thanks needed, though I am curious about something." He nodded toward the letter on the bedside table. "Your aunt in San Francisco, should we send word that you're safe?" Rebecca's face clouded. "My aunt passed away 2 months ago. That letter is from her lawyer, informing me that I have no place to go after all." Her fingers twisted in the bedsheet. "I was traveling to a destination that no longer exists." Daniel absorbed this information, understanding now the desperation that had driven her to continue her journey on foot. "Well," he said finally, "seems to me you've found a new destination, for as long as you need." Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes. "You've been too kind already. I can't impose, it's not an imposition," Daniel interrupted gently. "The ranch is big, and truth be told, it gets lonesome out here with just Mrs. Potts and the hands for company." He cleared his throat, suddenly self-conscious. "Besides, you're in no condition to travel, and I suspect you've got nowhere pressing to be." Rebecca studied him, as if trying to understand his motives. At 29, Daniel Evans was known throughout the territory as a fair but private man, not given to impulsive charity. Yet something about Rebecca Owens had pierced the careful armor he'd built around himself since losing his parents. "Thank you," she said simply. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "Get well," he replied. "That'll be payment enough." As spring blossomed into summer, Rebecca's health improved gradually. The violent coughing fits became less frequent, though they still left her weak and breathless. Dr. Wilson prescribed short walks in the fresh air, and Daniel took to escorting her around the ranch in the cooler evening hours. Their conversations during these walks revealed a growing connection. Rebecca shared stories of her life in Boston, her love of teaching, and her dreams of someday opening a school of her own. Daniel spoke of his parents, the challenges of ranching, and his quiet pride in the land that had been in his family for 2 generations. "You ever get lonely out here?" Rebecca asked one evening as they watched the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Daniel considered the question, his hat in his hands. "Used to think being alone and being lonely were different things. Now I'm not so sure." Rebecca nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Before I fell ill, I was surrounded by people, students, colleagues, neighbors. Yet I often felt isolated, as if I was watching life through a window rather than living it. And now," Daniel ventured, "now I feel more present, more alive, despite the illness." She smiled up at him, her face gaining beauty as health slowly returned. "Ironic, isn't it? I had to nearly die to learn how to live." Daniel felt something shift between them in that moment, a recognition of kindred spirits despite their different backgrounds. He offered his arm as they turned back toward the house, and her hand rested lightly in the crook of his elbow, a touch that felt both casual and significant. As summer progressed, Rebecca insisted on making herself useful around the ranch. Though still too weak for physical labor, she began keeping the ranch's books, her neat handwriting and head for figures bringing order to Daniel's haphazard accounting system. She also started teaching Jimmy and two of the younger ranch hands to read and write during the evenings, her face animated as she returned to her calling. Daniel often found himself pausing in his work to watch her, seated on the porch with her pupils, patiently guiding them through their letters. The consumption had left its mark. She remained thin, with shadows beneath her eyes, and the coughing, though less frequent, still troubled her. Yet there was a vibrancy about her that transcended physical fragility. One afternoon in late July, as Rebecca sat shelling peas with Mrs. Potts in the kitchen, they heard riders approaching. Daniel had gone to town for supplies, so Mrs. Potts went to the window, wiping her hands on her apron. "3 men," she reported, her voice tightening. "Don't recognize them." Rebecca joined her at the window, alarm rising as she saw the strangers dismounting. They were rough-looking men, trail-worn and hard-eyed. The leader, a tall man with a scar running down one cheek, surveyed the ranch with calculating eyes. "Stay inside, Mrs. Potts instructed, reaching for the shotgun Daniel kept above the door. "Lock the door behind me." "Mrs. Potts, no," Rebecca protested, but the older woman was already stepping onto the porch, shotgun held confidently in her weathered hands. "Afternoon, gentlemen, Mrs. Potts called, her voice steady. "Mr. Evans isn't here at present. State your business." The scarred man smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Just passing through, madam. Looking for water for our horses, maybe a meal if you're hospitable folk." "Pumps by the barn," Mrs. Potts replied. "You're welcome to water your horses and move along. Mr. Evans doesn't entertain strangers when he's not home." The 3 men exchanged glances, and Rebecca felt a chill despite the summer heat. Through the window, she could see the subtle shift in their posture, the way their hands hovered near their holstered guns. "That's not very neighborly," the scarred man said, taking a step forward. "We've been riding hard, got money to pay for a meal." Mrs. Potts stood her ground, the shotgun unwavering. "As I said, Mr. Evans," the crack of a rifle shot cut through the tension. All heads turned to see Daniel at the edge of the property, rifle raised, thunder blowing hard beneath him from a fast ride. "That was a warning," Daniel called, his voice carrying across the yard. "Next one won't be." The scarred man's hand moved away from his gun, a calculated retreat. "No need for that, friend, just looking for some hospitality. Like Mrs. Potts said, water's by the barn." Daniel rode closer, keeping the rifle ready. "Then you'll be moving on." A tense silence stretched between them until the scarred man nodded, a tight smile on his face. "Much obliged." He signaled to his companions, and they led their horses toward the water pump. Daniel dismounted, keeping his eyes on the strangers as he joined Mrs. Potts on the porch. "Recognize them?" he asked quietly. "No, but they've got the look," she replied. "Trouble." Rebecca opened the door, relief washing over her at Daniel's return. Their eyes met briefly, and she saw both reassurance and concern in his gaze before he turned back to watch the unwelcome visitors. The 3 men watered their horses, then mounted without approaching the house again. As they rode off, the scarred man tipped his hat in a mocking salute. "They'll be back," Daniel said grimly once they were out of sight. "That was Sila's morrow. He and his gang have been causing trouble up north. Heard in town they were headed this way." "Outlaws?" Rebecca asked, stepping onto the porch. Daniel nodded, his expression grave. "Rustlers mostly, but they've been known to rob stagecoaches too. Dangerous men." That night, Daniel set the ranch hands to taking watches, and he cleaned his rifle at the kitchen table, his movements methodical and familiar. Rebecca sat across from him, a shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. "I'm sorry to have brought this danger to your home," she said softly. Daniel looked up, confusion crossing his features. "This has nothing to do with you, Rebecca." Morrow's gang would have come whether you were here or not. They're after cattle, not consumptive school teachers." His attempt at humor drew a small smile from her. "Still, I feel responsible. If I wasn't here, you might have handled it differently." "Yes," he agreed, surprising her with his candor. "I might have invited them in and found myself with a bullet in my back." He set the rifle aside, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Having you and Mrs. Potts here reminds me I've got something worth protecting." "That's not a weakness, Rebecca. It's a strength." His calloused fingers were warm against hers, and Rebecca felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her illness. In the weeks since Daniel had carried her to safety, something had grown between them, a connection deeper than gratitude or obligation. "You should get some rest," Daniel said, reluctantly releasing her hand. "Dr. Wilson says you need your strength." Rebecca nodded, rising from the table. "Promise you'll wake me if there's trouble." "I promise." The intensity in his eyes told her he meant it, that he wouldn't shield her from danger at the cost of leaving her unprepared. That night, sleep eluded Rebecca. She lay awake, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the occasional whinny from the stable, the creak of floorboards as someone moved about the house. Her thoughts circled between fear of Morrow's return and the warm pressure of Daniel's hand on hers. She must have dozed eventually, for she woke with a start to the sound of urgent voices. Pale dawn light filtered through her window as she hurriedly dressed, her heart pounding. When she emerged from her room, she found Daniel and two ranch hands in urgent conversation. 20 head at least," one of the hands was saying. "Tracks lead east toward the canyon." Daniel's face was set in hard lines. "Saddle up, we'll track them." He turned, noticing Rebecca in the doorway. "Morrow's gang struck in the night, took some of our best breeding stock." "You're going after them," alarm colored her voice. "Have to. Those cattle represent a significant investment." Daniel strapped on his gun belt, checking the revolver before holstering it. "Mrs. Potts and Jimmy will stay behind. You'll be safe." Rebecca stepped forward, fighting back a cough that threatened to undermine her resolve. "Be careful. Morrow seems dangerous." Something softened in Daniel's eyes. He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek in a touch so brief she might have imagined it. "I'll return. You keep getting stronger." With that, he was gone, striding out to where Thunder waited impatiently. Rebecca watched from the porch as Daniel and 4 ranch hands rode out, following the trail of the stolen cattle. Mrs. Potts joined her, a rifle cradled in her arms. "Come inside, dear," the older woman said. "No use fretting where they can't see it. Besides, you'll catch a chill." The day passed with excruciating slowness. Rebecca tried to distract herself with chores, but her thoughts remained with Daniel and the dangers he might be facing. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising a summer storm. "They'll shelter if the weather turns," Mrs. Potts assured her, noting Rebecca's anxious glances toward the window. "Daniel knows these lands better than anyone. He won't take foolish risks." As if to punctuate her words, thunder rumbled in the distance. Rebecca shivered, not from cold but from a nameless dread that had settled in her bones. She had lost so much already: her health, her profession, her plans for the future. The thought of losing Daniel, who had become the center of her new world, was unbearable. The storm broke with sudden fury, rain lashing against the windows and wind howling around the eaves. Rebecca stood at the window, peering into the gathering darkness, willing the shadowy figures of riders to appear. It was well past midnight when they finally returned. Rebecca, who had refused to retire despite Mrs. Potts's urging, rushed to the door at the sound of hooves in the yard. 5 riders approached through the rain, moving slowly, and her heart sank when she realized one was slumped in the saddle, supported by another rider. Daniel dismounted first, rain streaming from his hat and coat. His face was grim as he turned to help the injured man, Tom Fletcher, one of the younger hands, from his horse. "Mrs. Potts," Daniel called. "Tom's been shot, clean through the shoulder." Rebecca held the door wide as they carried Tom inside. "The cattle?" she asked as Daniel passed. "Recovered," he answered tersely. "Morrow and one of his men got away. We got the third." She understood his meaning. The third outlaw hadn't survived the confrontation. Daniel's expression was shuttered, revealing nothing of what had transpired in the canyon, but the tight set of his jaw spoke of hard decisions and harder actions. Mrs. Potts took charge of Tom's care, cleaning and bandaging the wound with practiced efficiency. "He'll live," she pronounced. "Bullet went clean through, no bone damage I can feel." Daniel nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. He turned to Rebecca, noticing for the first time the dark circles beneath her eyes. "You should have been resting," he chided gently. "How could I rest, not knowing if you were safe?" The words escaped before she could temper them, revealing more of her feelings than she had intended. Something shifted in Daniel's expression, a softening around the eyes, a subtle parting of his lips in surprise. Before he could respond, however, a violent coughing fit seized Rebecca. She turned away, pressing a handkerchief to her mouth, embarrassed by this reminder of her frailty. Daniel's hand came to rest on her back, steadying her until the coughing subsided. When she looked up, she saw not pity in his eyes but concern and something deeper that made her breath catch for reasons unrelated to her illness. "I'm all right," she assured him, though the handkerchief in her hand was spotted with blood. "You should see the doctor tomorrow," Daniel said, his voice low. "The excitement today, it wasn't good for you." Rebecca wanted to protest that worrying about him had been far more taxing than any physical exertion, but she merely nodded. "Will Morrow return?" she asked instead. Daniel's expression darkened. "Possibly, but not tonight and not without reinforcements. We'll be vigilant." He hesitated, then added, "I've sent word to the marshal in Denver. With luck, he'll send deputies to track Morrow down before he can cause more trouble." That night, despite her exhaustion, Rebecca again found sleep elusive. The events of the day replayed in her mind: the fear for Daniel's safety, the relief of his return, the unspoken moment between them interrupted by her treacherous lungs. Outside, the storm continued, rain drumming on the roof and lightning occasionally illuminating her room in stark flashes. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. "Rebecca," Daniel's voice, low and uncertain. "Are you awake?" She sat up, pulling her shawl around her nightdress. "Yes, come in." Daniel entered, carrying a steaming cup. He had changed into dry clothes, but his hair was still damp, curling slightly at the nape of his neck. "Mrs. Potts's special tea," he explained, offering the cup, "for your cough." Rebecca accepted it gratefully, inhaling the soothing herbal aroma. "Thank you. I thought everyone would be asleep by now." "Couldn't settle," Daniel admitted, remaining standing as propriety demanded. "Wanted to check on you first." The lamplight cast half his face in shadow, emphasizing the strong line of his jaw and the weariness in his posture. Rebecca was struck by how much older he looked tonight, as if the confrontation with Morrow had aged him. "What happened out there?" she asked softly. "With Morrow and his men?" Daniel was silent for a long moment, and Rebecca thought he might refuse to answer. When he spoke, his voice was measured, controlled. "We tracked them to the canyon. They'd split up the herd, making it harder to recover all the cattle at once. We surprised them as they were making camp." He looked down at his hands, as if seeing something there that troubled him. "They drew first. Tom was hit early in the exchange. One of Morrow's men, a young fellow, couldn't have been more than 20, took a bullet in the chest." Rebecca saw the regret in his eyes, understanding that despite the necessity of his actions, taking a life, even in self-defense, weighed heavily on him. "You did what you had to do," she said. "Did I?" The question seemed directed more at himself than at her. "There's always a choice, Rebecca. Always a moment when a man decides what kind of person he'll be." He met her gaze directly. "I've tried to be a decent man today. I'm not sure if I succeeded." Rebecca set her tea aside and rose, crossing the small distance between them. Without hesitation, she took his hands in hers. "The fact that you question, it tells me everything I need to know about your character, Daniel Owens. A truly bad man wouldn't lose sleep over his actions." His fingers tightened around hers, drawing strength from her touch. "When I was riding back today, all I could think about was getting home to the ranch, to Mrs. Potts." His voice softened. "To you." The admission hung between them, charged with meaning. Rebecca felt her heart quicken, the fluttering in her chest now entirely due to the intensity of Daniel's gaze. "I should let you rest," he said, reluctantly releasing her hands. "Daniel," she called as he turned to leave. When he looked back, she gathered her courage. "I'm glad you came home safe." A smile touched his lips, the first she'd seen since his return. "Good night, Rebecca." "Good night, Daniel." As summer waned into early autumn, life at the Double E Ranch settled into a new rhythm. The marshal sent deputies who tracked Morrow to Wyoming territory, easing immediate concerns about his return. Tom Fletcher's wound healed cleanly, and the recovered cattle thrived in the abundant late summer grazing. Rebecca's health continued to improve, though slowly. The violent coughing fits became less frequent, and Dr. Wilson noted with satisfaction that she had gained weight. "The mountain air is doing its work," he declared during one visit. "Continue as you are, and you might see significant improvement by spring." The unspoken feelings between Rebecca and Daniel grew despite neither giving them voice. They fell into comfortable routines, reading together in the evenings, walking the property at sunset, sharing the small triumphs and challenges of ranch life. Daniel found reasons to seek her company, and Rebecca discovered that her brightest moments were those spent with him. Mrs. Potts observed their growing attachment with quiet approval. "He smiles more with you around," she told Rebecca one afternoon as they worked together preserving late summer peaches. "Hasn't smiled proper since his mother passed." Rebecca blushed, focusing intently on the peach in her hands. "He's been very kind to me." "Kindness has nothing to do with the way that man looks at you when you're not watching," Mrs. Potts replied matter-of-factly. "And don't think I haven't noticed you doing the same." Before Rebecca could formulate a response, a coughing fit overtook her. It was shorter than previous episodes, but still left her breathless and reminded her of the stark reality of her situation. When it passed, she wiped her mouth with a handkerchief, relieved to see no blood this time. "That's the trouble, isn't it?" she said quietly. "Even if Daniel does care for me, what future could there be? I'm still ill, still uncertain how much time I have." Mrs. Potts set down her knife, fixing Rebecca with a stern gaze. "Now you listen here, young lady. I've lived long enough to know that time isn't promised to any of us. My Henry was the picture of health until a rattlesnake decided otherwise. Life out here is uncertain for everyone." Her expression softened. "Don't deny yourself happiness today because you're afraid of tomorrow." Rebecca considered the older woman's words, finding wisdom in them despite her lingering doubts. That evening, when Daniel suggested their usual walk, she agreed with a new sense of purpose. They strolled toward the small creek that ran along the eastern boundary of the ranch, the setting sun painting the landscape in rich golds and reds. The cottonwood trees along the water were beginning to turn, a few yellow leaves already drifting down to the ground. Winter comes early up here, Daniel remarked, helping Rebecca over a fallen log. First snow usually by late October. Rebecca paused, gazing out over the land that had become more home to her than Boston ever was. It's beautiful. I never imagined I'd end up somewhere like this. Daniel watched her, something unreadable in his expression. Do you miss the city? Your life there? Sometimes, she admitted. I miss teaching properly with chalk and books in a classroom full of children. She smiled up at him. But Boston never gave me this open skies, clean air, and, Daniel prompted when she hesitated. People who truly see me, she finished softly. Not just a respectable spinster schoolteacher, not just a consumptive invalid, but me, Rebecca. Daniel took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. I see you, Rebecca Owens. I've seen you from the moment I found you on the plains. The tenderness in his voice made her tremble. Daniel, she stopped, uncertain how to express the tumult of emotions within her. You don't have to say anything, he assured her. I know your situation is complicated. Your health, your future plans, no, she interrupted, finding her courage. That's not it. I'm afraid. Afraid that what I feel for you might not be fair to either of us. My illness is part of you, Daniel finished. Not all of you, but part of who you are right now. Do you think I haven't considered that? Do you think it matters to me? Rebecca's eyes widened at his directness. It should matter. I don't know if I'll ever be completely well. I might always be diminished. Daniel shook his head, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Rebecca Owens, there is nothing diminished about you. You're the strongest person I've ever met and the bravest. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with gentle fingers. And if you'll permit me to say so, the most beautiful. Rebecca's breath caught, not from illness but from the intensity of his gaze. Daniel, I'm falling in love with you, he said simply. I think I started falling the moment I carried you home in my saddle, and if you don't feel the same, I'll understand. But I couldn't go another day without telling you. Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes, blurring her vision of his beloved face. I do feel the same, she whispered. I've tried not to for both our sakes, but I can't help it. I love you, Daniel Evans. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, Daniel leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle yet fervent, tender yet passionate. Rebecca responded with all the love she had kept contained for so long, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. When they parted, Daniel kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. I don't know what the future holds for either of us, he murmured. But I want to face it with you, whatever comes. Together, Rebecca agreed, her heart fuller than she had ever thought possible. As they walked back to the ranch house, hand in hand in the gathering twilight, Rebecca felt a sense of peace she had never known before. The consumption might still claim her in the end, but for now, for this moment, she was alive and loved. And that was enough. The autumn days passed in a golden haze of happiness for Rebecca and Daniel. Their love, once acknowledged, blossomed openly, bringing joy not only to themselves but to everyone at the Double E Ranch. Mrs. Potts beamed with satisfaction, treating their romance as her personal triumph. The ranch hands exchanged knowing glances, but respected their boss enough to keep any teasing good-natured and brief. One crisp October morning, as the first hint of frost silvered the grass, Daniel suggested a ride to his favorite spot on the property. It's a bit of a journey, he warned. Are you strong enough? Rebecca, who had been gaining strength steadily, nodded with confidence. Dr. Wilson said moderate exercise would be good for me. Besides, I've been wanting to explore more of the ranch. Daniel helped her mount a gentle mare named Willow, his hands lingering at her waist longer than strictly necessary. They rode at an easy pace, Daniel pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his childhood adventures in these hills. Rebecca drank in every word, her heart swelling with love for both the man and the land that had saved her. After an hour's ride, they crested a hill to reveal a view that took Rebecca's breath away. Below them stretched the entire valley, the ranch buildings tiny in the distance, the meandering creek catching the morning sunlight like a ribbon of silver. Beyond, the mountains rose majestically, their peaks already dusted with snow. "It's magnificent," Rebecca breathed, dismounting carefully. Daniel tied their horses to a nearby tree and joined her at the edge of the overlook. "My father brought me here when I was 10 years old, told me that someday all this would be mine to protect and nurture." His voice held reverence for both the memory and the responsibility. "I never understood what he meant until recently." Rebecca glanced at him questioningly. "What changed? You did." Daniel took her hands in his. "Before, the ranch was my duty, my livelihood. Now it's something more, it's a future, a home I want to share." Rebecca's heart raced as Daniel lowered himself to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "Rebecca Owens, I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but I feel like my soul has recognized yours from the first moment. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of making this ranch truly a home with me?" Tears of joy spilled down Rebecca's cheeks. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Daniel, yes." He rose and swept her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left them both breathless. When they finally parted, Daniel reached into his pocket and withdrew a small gold ring. "It was my mother's," he explained, sliding it onto Rebecca's finger. "She made me promise I'd only give it to a woman who captured my heart completely." Rebecca admired the simple band with its small diamond, more precious to her than any elaborate city jewel could ever be. "It's perfect. I'll treasure it always." They spent the morning at the overlook, planning their future together. Daniel wanted a small wedding at the ranch before winter set in fully. Rebecca agreed, having no desire for elaborate ceremonies or distant relatives who had never shown interest in her welfare. "We should build a proper school," Rebecca suggested, her eyes alight with passion. "There are enough children on neighboring ranches to warrant it. I could teach again." Daniel nodded, loving her enthusiasm. "I've been thinking the same. The old bunkhouse could be converted. It's not being used since we built the new one last year." Their dreams unfolded against the backdrop of the magnificent landscape, children of their own someday, expansions to the ranch, a community growing around them. If Rebecca's illness cast a shadow over these plans, neither acknowledged it. They had chosen to embrace the present and hope for the future, whatever it might bring. As they rode back to the ranch, Rebecca felt a contentment she had never thought possible when she first set out from Boston, sick and alone. The consumption had brought her west, but love had given her a reason to fight, to heal, to live. News of their engagement spread quickly. Dr. Wilson, arriving for Rebecca's monthly examination, offered both congratulations and cautious approval. "Marriage agrees with many consumptives," he noted. "Though I advise moderation in all things, Mrs. Evans to be." Mrs. Potts immediately began planning the wedding feast, declaring that no bride of the Double E would have anything less than the finest celebration the territory had seen. Jimmy and the other ranch hands, under Daniel's direction, began converting the old bunkhouse into a schoolhouse as a wedding gift for Rebecca. Letters were sent to the few people they wished to invite: the nearest neighbors, the minister from town, Daniel's cousin from Denver who was his only living relative. Rebecca had no family to notify, a fact that sometimes brought a shadow of sadness to her eyes. "You have family now," Daniel assured her one evening as they sat before the fire. Me, Mrs. Potts, even those rough cowboys out there were your family now. Rebecca leaned her head against his shoulder, content. I know, and I'm grateful for each of you. The wedding was set for the first week of November, before the heavy snows would make travel difficult for their guests. Rebecca worked with Mrs. Potts to prepare her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation of cream-colored silk that Daniel had ordered from Denver as a surprise. As the wedding approached, Rebecca's health continued to improve, each day bringing more color to her cheeks and strength to her limbs. The coughing fits grew less frequent, though they still occurred, especially when she overexerted herself. Dr. Wilson remained cautiously optimistic. The mountain air is working its magic, he told Daniel privately after one examination. That and happiness. Never underestimate the healing power of a contented heart. 3 days before the wedding, as Rebecca was trying on her completed dress for Mrs. Potts's approval, Daniel burst into the house, his expression troubled. Marshall sent word, he announced grimly. Morrow's gang was spotted 20 miles north. They raided the Peterson place yesterday, burned the barn, stole livestock. Rebecca's hand flew to her throat in alarm. Are they headed this way? Can't be certain, but we need to prepare. Daniel's jaw was set in determination. I've sent Jimmy to alert the neighbors. We'll bring everyone here safety in numbers. The news cast a pall over the wedding preparations. By nightfall, 3 neighboring families had arrived with their children and what valuables they could transport. The Millers, the Johnsons, and the Parkers were all ranching families who had settled in the area within the last decade. Among them were 8 children ranging in age from 2 to 15. Rebecca immediately took charge of the children, organizing sleeping arrangements in the main house and finding activities to distract them from their parents' worried conversations. Daniel met with the men, developing strategies to defend the ranch if Morrow attacked. We should postpone the wedding, Rebecca suggested that night when they finally had a moment alone. It doesn't seem right to celebrate with this threat hanging over us. Daniel took her hands, his expression serious but determined. No, if anything, this is more reason to proceed as planned. Life doesn't stop for men like Morrow if we let them dictate our happiness. They've already won. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I want you to be my wife, Rebecca Owens. 3 days from now, come what may. Rebecca nodded against his chest, drawing strength from his certainty. Then we'll be married in 3 days, and we'll face whatever comes together. The next day passed in tense vigilance. The men took turns patrolling the property boundaries while the women continued wedding preparations, their hands busy with cooking and sewing even as their eyes frequently darted to the windows. The children, sensing the adults' anxiety despite efforts to shield them, were subdued in their play. Rebecca established an impromptu school in the parlor, reasoning that structure and learning would help normalize the situation for the children. As she guided young Sarah Johnson through her letters, she caught Daniel watching from the doorway, his expression soft despite the rifle in his hands. You're a natural teacher, he said later as they walked the perimeter of the house together in the fading light. Those children adore you already. Rebecca smiled, leaning into his side. Teaching gives me purpose. Even now, with everything happening, it reminds me there's a future worth planning for. Daniel's arm tightened around her waist. There is, our future. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with frost etching delicate patterns on the windows and a thin layer of snow dusting the ground. No sign of Morrow's gang had been detected, though none of the men had relaxed their vigilance. Mrs. Potts and Sarah Johnson's mother helped Rebecca dress, arranging her dark hair in an elegant style, adorned with white flowers from Mrs. Potts's carefully protected indoor garden. The cream silk dress fit perfectly, highlighting Rebecca's slender grace while cleverly disguising how thin she remained from her illness. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Potts declared, tears glistening in her eyes. "Absolutely beautiful." Rebecca studied her reflection in the small mirror, hardly recognizing the radiant woman who looked back at her. Gone was the pale, desperate invalid who had collapsed on the plains months ago. In her place stood a bride, still bearing the marks of consumption but alive with hope and love. The ceremony was to take place at noon in the ranch's main room, which had been transformed with autumn flowers and ribbons. The neighbors had arranged themselves as guests, the children scrubbed clean and on their best behavior. Reverend Thompson from town had arrived the previous evening, bringing news that the marshal and his deputies were on Morrow's trail. As Rebecca waited in Daniel's bedroom, which had been designated her preparation area, she heard the guests assembling. Mrs. Potts had arranged for one of the ranch hands who played fiddle to provide music, and the sweet strains of a familiar hymn filtered through the door. A soft knock announced Mr. Johnson, who had volunteered to escort Rebecca in the absence of her father. "Ready, Miss Owens?" he asked with a kind smile. "Everyone's waiting." Rebecca took a deep breath, smoothing her dress with suddenly trembling hands. "Yes, I'm ready." The door opened, and Rebecca stepped into the hallway. The music shifted to a wedding march as Mr. Johnson offered his arm. Together, they walked toward the main room where Daniel waited. Rebecca would forever remember the moment she entered and saw Daniel standing before the fireplace. He wore a new black suit ordered from Denver, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. But it was his expression that captured her heart, the look of absolute wonder and love as he beheld his bride. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. Rebecca and Daniel spoke their vows clearly, their voices carrying to every corner of the room. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Daniel's kiss was tender yet passionate, prompting cheers from the assembled guests and giggles from the children. The celebration that followed was joyous despite the undercurrent of vigilance. Tables had been arranged on the covered porch, allowing space for everyone to feast on Mrs. Potts's magnificent wedding dinner. Wine was poured, toasts were made, and for a few precious hours, the threat of Morrow's gang receded beneath the warmth of community and celebration. As the afternoon waned, Rebecca found herself surrounded by the neighboring women, who offered both congratulations and practical advice for married life with varying degrees of discretion. Mrs. Johnson, a motherly woman with 5 children, took Rebecca aside with particular concern. "Your health, dear, has the doctor spoken to you about marital relations?" she asked delicately. Rebecca blushed but appreciated the woman's concern. "Yes, Dr. Wilson provided guidance. Daniel is well aware of my limitations. We'll be careful." Mrs. Johnson patted her hand. "Good. Because we want you healthy and strong. These children need their teacher, and that man over there," she nodded toward Daniel, who was deep in conversation with the other men, "needs his wife." As twilight approached, the guests prepared to depart despite Daniel's offer of continued shelter. "We need to check on our properties," Mr. Miller explained. "Besides, with the marshal in pursuit, Morrow's likely moved on to easier targets." Daniel didn't argue, though he insisted on sending 2 ranch hands to escort each family home. As the last wagon disappeared down the drive, he turned to Rebecca with a sigh of relief. "Mrs. Evans," he said, testing the name on his tongue, "how does it feel to be married?" Rebecca leaned into his embrace, her heart full. "Wonderful, perfect, like coming home after a long journey." He kissed her softly, mindful of Mrs. Potts still bustling about the kitchen. "It's been quite a day. You must be tired." Rebecca nodded, fatigue evident in the slight droop of her shoulders. The excitement and emotion of the day had taxed her still recovering strength. A little, but happy tired. Daniel swept her into his arms without warning, eliciting a surprised laugh. "Then allow me to carry my bride to our room, Mrs. Evans." He carried her through the house to what had been his bedroom but was now theirs. The room had been transformed in Rebecca's absence, fresh linens on the bed, wildflowers in a vase by the window, and candles casting a warm glow over everything. "Mrs. Potts's doing," Daniel explained, setting Rebecca gently on her feet. "She wanted everything perfect for you." Rebecca turned in a slow circle, taking in the space that would now be their private sanctuary. "It is perfect." Daniel stood somewhat awkwardly by the door, his confidence of moments ago replaced by consideration for her comfort. "I'll give you privacy to change," he offered. "Take as long as you need." Rebecca approached him slowly, reaching up to touch his face. "Daniel, I'm not made of glass, I won't break." His eyes darkened as he caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I know, but your health is better every day," she finished. "Dr. Wilson said moderation, not abstinence." A blush colored her cheeks at her own boldness, but she continued, "I want to be your wife in every way, Daniel, tonight and always." The hesitation in his eyes gave way to desire, tempered still by tenderness. "I'll always be careful with you, Rebecca. Always put your well-being first." "I know," she whispered. "That's one of the countless reasons I love you." Their first night as husband and wife was a revelation of gentle passion and deep connection. Daniel was as careful with her body as he had promised, attentive to every sign of fatigue or discomfort. For Rebecca, who had expected to die alone when the stagecoach abandoned her on the plains, the intimacy was a miracle, a celebration of life and love she had never dared hope for. Later, as they lay entwined beneath the quilts, Rebecca rested her head on Daniel's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Thank you," she murmured. "For what?" His voice rumbled beneath her ear. "For finding me, for saving me, for loving me." Daniel's arms tightened around her. "You saved me too, Rebecca. I was existing, not living, before you came." Outside, the first heavy snow of winter began to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Inside, warmed by love and the promise of a shared future, Rebecca and Daniel Evans drifted to sleep as husband and wife. The winter of 1876-1877 proved one of the harshest in Colorado Territory's memory. Snow fell in abundance, transforming the landscape into a glistening white expanse broken only by the stark silhouettes of buildings and trees. The Double E Ranch stood like an island in a frozen sea, its occupants snug within its solid walls. For Rebecca and Daniel, the enforced isolation of winter was a blessing. Free from the immediate threat of Morrow's gang, who had been driven north by the marshal's persistent pursuit, they settled into the rhythms of married life. Their days took on a comfortable pattern, Daniel tending to the necessary ranch work with his men, Rebecca managing the household alongside Mrs. Potts, and continuing her preparations for the schoolhouse, which would open with the spring thaw. Rebecca's health continued its slow but steady improvement. Dr. Wilson, making his monthly visits despite the challenging weather, noted with satisfaction the increased strength in her lungs and the healthy glow that had replaced her former pallor. "Marriage agrees with you, Mrs. Evans," he remarked during a February examination, "though I suspect the clean mountain air and proper care have played their parts as well." Rebecca smiled, buttoning her blouse after the doctor's inspection. "All of the above, doctor." And having purpose again, preparing for the school, helping with the ranch accounts, it gives me reason to grow stronger. Dr. Wilson nodded approvingly. "Purpose is a powerful medicine, as is happiness." He packed his instruments with methodical care. Continue as you are, and by summer, I believe we might see significant improvement in your condition. The news filled Rebecca with cautious hope. Though the consumption still made itself known through occasional coughing fits and lingering fatigue, she had begun to believe in a future where the disease might be managed, if not completely cured. Daniel received the doctor's report with poorly concealed relief. Though he never spoke of it, Rebecca knew he harbored fears about her health, about losing her to the same disease that had claimed his mother. That night, he held her especially close, his face buried in her hair as if to reassure himself of her continued presence. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered, understanding his unspoken fear. "Dr. Wilson says I'm improving." "I know," Daniel murmured against her neck, "but sometimes I wake in the night and listen for your breathing just to be certain." Rebecca turned in his arms to face him, her hand coming up to trace the beloved contours of his face. "I'm fighting, Daniel, for us, for our future, for all the plans we've made." His kiss was fierce and tender all at once, a physical expression of emotions too profound for words. Later, as they lay together in the intimate darkness, Rebecca felt the first stirrings of an idea that had been forming in her mind for weeks. "Daniel," she began hesitantly, "have you ever thought about children, about us having a family?" She felt him tense slightly beside her. "Of course I have," he admitted. "But your health is improving," she finished. "Dr. Wilson didn't say we shouldn't consider it, only that we should wait until I'm stronger." Daniel propped himself up on one elbow, studying her face in the dim light filtering through the curtains. "Is this something you want, Rebecca, children of our own?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Not immediately, I understand the risks, but someday. A little boy with your eyes, perhaps, or a girl with your determination." A slow smile spread across Daniel's face, transforming it with joy. "I'd like that. Very much." He laid a gentle hand on her abdomen, the touch reverent. "A family of our own when the time is right." The possibility of children, of extending their love into the future, added new dimension to their shared dreams. As winter slowly yielded to spring, they spoke often of the family they hoped to create, not just children of their body, but a community centered around the ranch and the new school. March brought the first thaws, patches of mud appearing amid the lingering snow. With the improving weather came increased activity as the ranch prepared for calving season. Rebecca found herself busier than ever, dividing her time between household duties and finalizing preparations for the school's opening in April. The converted bunkhouse had been transformed into a cheerful classroom, with desks salvaged from the town's old schoolhouse, a blackboard mounted on the far wall, and bookshelves Daniel had crafted himself. Rebecca spent hours organizing books, creating lesson plans, and preparing for the dozen students who would attend, children from neighboring ranches as well as the children of her own ranch hands. "It's perfect," she declared one afternoon as she and Daniel stood in the completed schoolroom. "Better than my classroom in Boston." Daniel squeezed her hand, pride evident in his expression. "The children are fortunate to have you as their teacher. This school will make a difference in their lives." Rebecca leaned against him, contentment washing over her. "Our lives have turned out so differently than I imagined when I left Boston. So much better." The school opened on the first Monday in April, with 12 students ranging in age from 5 to 15 arriving on horseback or in wagons driven by proud parents. Rebecca welcomed each child with genuine warmth, her heart full as she watched them take their seats in the bright, airy room that represented so much of her recovered dreams. Teaching again brought Rebecca profound satisfaction. Despite the occasional coughing fit that forced her to pause a lesson, she found the work invigorating rather than depleting. The children responded enthusiastically to her methods, their eager minds absorbing knowledge like the spring earth soaked up rain. Daniel often found excuses to visit the schoolhouse during the day, ostensibly to check on repairs or deliver supplies. The real reason was transparent to everyone. He simply enjoyed seeing his wife in her element, animated and purposeful as she guided her students through their lessons. "You're staring, Mr. Evans," Rebecca teased during one such visit as the children worked on their arithmetic. "You'll distract the students." "Can't help it, Mrs. Evans," he replied with an unrepentant grin. "I'm married to the prettiest schoolteacher in the territory." The children giggled, used to the obvious affection between their teacher and the ranch owner. Rebecca shooed Daniel away with mock severity, her cheeks flushed with pleasure at his open admiration. As spring blossomed into summer, life at the Double E Ranch settled into a harmonious rhythm. The cattle thrived on the abundant grass, the garden yielded plentiful vegetables, and the school term progressed successfully. Rebecca's health continued to improve, her strength growing as the warm days allowed for longer walks and occasional rides around the property. News from the outside world reached them sporadically through travelers and the weekly mail delivery. The marshal had successfully disbanded Morrow's gang, though Silas himself had escaped capture, last seen heading toward the Dakota Territory. The territory was growing, with new settlements springing up as the railroad expanded westward. On a warm evening in late June, as Rebecca and Daniel sat on the porch watching the sunset, a rider appeared on the horizon. Daniel tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle kept near the door but relaxed as the figure drew closer. "It's Jimmy," he noted, recognizing his young ranch hand who had been sent to town for supplies. "Back earlier than expected." Jimmy rode into the yard at a canter, his expression urgent. "Mr. Evans, news from town. There's been a telegram. They're building a railroad spur through the valley. Right across Double E land." Daniel stood, his body suddenly taut with tension. "What, without consultation or permission?" Jimmy dismounted, handing over a folded paper. "Mr. Thompson at the general store gave me this, said it came in on the telegraph yesterday." Daniel unfolded the document, reading quickly, his expression darkening. Rebecca joined him, peering at the official notice that informed them of the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad Company's intent to survey a route through their property within the month. "They can't just take our land," Rebecca protested. "Can they?" Daniel's jaw clenched. "Legally, they can petition for right-of-way under eminent domain, but they're supposed to negotiate fair compensation." He refolded the paper with deliberate care. "I need to ride to Denver, speak with the railroad officials in person, and possibly consult a lawyer." Rebecca nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The railroad could bring benefits: easier access to markets, faster mail service, connection to the wider world, but it could also disrupt their carefully built life and the natural beauty of the land Daniel loved so deeply. "When will you go?" she asked. "Tomorrow at first light," Daniel decided. "The sooner I address this, the better our position for negotiation." That night, as they prepared for bed, Rebecca sensed Daniel's preoccupation. His movements were mechanical, his responses to her conversation distracted. As she brushed her hair, watching him in the mirror, she saw the weight of responsibility in the set of his shoulders. "Talk to me," she urged softly. "What are you thinking?" Daniel sighed, sitting heavily on the edge of the bed. "My father worked his entire life to build this ranch. He taught me that the land was sacred, a trust to be protected and passed down. The thought of a railroad cutting through it." He shook his head, words failing him. Rebecca set down her brush and moved to sit beside him, taking his hand. "The ranch will still be here, Daniel." Changed, perhaps, but still ours. Still the home we've built together. He turned to her, gratitude softening his features. How do you always know exactly what to say? Because I know you, she replied simply. Your heart, your values, your love for this place, and I share them now. Daniel pulled her close, drawing strength from her presence. Come with me to Denver, he suggested suddenly. It would be good to have you there, and the change of scenery might be pleasant after months at the ranch. Rebecca considered the proposal. The school term had just ended for the summer, freeing her from daily teaching responsibilities. Denver, though not Boston, offered amenities and cultural opportunities absent from their rural life. Most importantly, she and Daniel had never been separated since their marriage, and the thought of him facing this challenge alone troubled her. Yes, she decided, I'll come with you. We'll face this together as we've faced everything else. Daniel's relief was palpable. Thank you. Having you with me will make all the difference. They departed the next morning after breakfast, leaving Mrs. Potts in charge of the household and Tom Fletcher overseeing the ranch operations. The journey to Denver would take 2 days on horseback, with an overnight stay at a way station along the route. Rebecca rode Willow, the gentle mare now as familiar with her as Thunder was with Daniel. The summer landscape was magnificent, wildflowers carpeting the meadows and cottonwoods providing welcome shade along creek beds. Rebecca found herself enjoying the journey despite its serious purpose, her improved health allowing her to appreciate the beauty around them without the constant struggle for breath that had once defined her existence. They reached the way station by late afternoon, a modest establishment offering clean if simple accommodations for travelers. The proprietor, a widow named Mrs. Blackwood, welcomed them warmly, providing a private room and a hearty supper of venison stew and fresh bread. Railroad business, is it? She asked as they ate, her keen eyes missing nothing. Seen a fair number of ranchers passing through lately on the same errand. Daniel nodded, unsurprised that news traveled fast. They're proposing a route through our land. We're going to negotiate terms. Mrs. Blackwood snorted. Good luck with that. Railroad companies aren't known for their generous nature. Still, she eyed Rebecca thoughtfully, they might listen more to a gentleman with his lady wife beside him. Gives an air of respectability. Rebecca smiled at the older woman's practical assessment. We hope so, Mrs. Blackwood. That night, in the narrow bed of their rented room, Daniel held Rebecca close, his thoughts clearly still occupied with the challenges ahead. Whatever happens in Denver, he murmured against her hair, we'll face it together. The ranch, the school, our future there secure as long as we have each other. Rebecca pressed closer, her heart full. Always together, she agreed. Now sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day. They reached Denver by late afternoon the following day, the city sprawling before them in a stark contrast to the rural tranquility of the Double E. Streets bustled with activity. Buildings rose multiple stories high, and the constant noise of commerce and construction filled the air. For Rebecca, who had spent the last year in relative isolation, the sensory impact was both exhilarating and overwhelming. Daniel led them to a modest hotel recommended by his cousin William, who worked as a banker in the city. After securing their room and freshening up from the journey, they set out to locate the offices of the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad Company, planning to request an appointment for the following day. The railroad's headquarters occupied an imposing brick building near the center of the city. Inside, a clerk informed them that Mr. Harrison Caldwell, the company's land acquisition agent, could see them the following morning at 9 o'clock. With this arranged, Daniel and Rebecca returned to their hotel, where they found William waiting for them in the lobby. Cousin. William greeted Daniel warmly, embracing him before turning to Rebecca with a respectful bow. "And this must be the new Mrs. Evans I've heard so much about. A pleasure to finally meet you, madam." Rebecca liked William immediately. He had Daniel's forthright manner, though his years in the city had polished away some of the rancher's rugged edges. Over dinner at a nearby restaurant, William offered insights into the railroad company's practices and the legal considerations of their situation. "They'll try to lowball you," he warned. "Offer compensation well below market value for the land, and they'll emphasize the benefits the railroad will bring: increased property values, easier access to markets." Daniel nodded grimly. "What's your advice?" "Know your bottom line before you walk in," William replied promptly. "Decide what's truly important to you. Is it the amount of compensation, the specific route through your property, provisions for cattle crossings?" He leaned forward earnestly. "And don't agree to anything immediately. Ask for time to consider any offer. Consult with a lawyer if necessary." The meeting with Harrison Caldwell the next morning proved every bit as challenging as William had suggested. The land agent was cordial but firm, presenting plans for a route that would cut directly through the heart of the Double E's most fertile grazing land. "The company is prepared to offer fair compensation, of course," Caldwell stated, naming a figure that made Daniel's jaw tighten. "And you must consider the benefits, Mr. Evans. The railroad will increase your property value substantially and provide direct access to markets for your cattle, at the cost of dividing my best grazing land and disrupting established cattle paths," Daniel countered evenly. "Not to mention the noise and smoke that will disturb both livestock and wildlife." Rebecca observed the negotiation with growing concern, noting the subtle shift in Caldwell's demeanor from cordial to dismissive as Daniel continued to resist his proposals. When Caldwell began to address his remarks solely to Daniel, as if she were invisible, Rebecca decided intervention was necessary. "Mr. Caldwell," she interjected during a pause, her voice clear and confident, "my husband and I understand progress is inevitable, and we're not opposed to the railroad in principle. But surely a slight adjustment to your proposed route would benefit everyone involved." Caldwell blinked, clearly surprised by her participation. "Adjustment, Mrs. Evans?" Rebecca unfolded the map on his desk, pointing to the eastern boundary of their property. "This area here is rocky, less valuable for grazing, and already separated from the main ranch by a natural ridge. If the track were to follow this line instead, it would require less grading for your construction teams and preserve the integrity of our most productive land." Daniel glanced at her with undisguised admiration, recognizing the logic of her suggestion. Caldwell studied the map with newfound interest. "It's a possibility," he admitted reluctantly. "I'd need to consult with our engineers, of course." "Of course," Rebecca agreed pleasantly. "We'd be happy to wait while you do so. We'll be in Denver for 3 more days." By the end of the meeting, Caldwell had agreed to consider their alternative route and revise the compensation offer accordingly. As they left the railroad offices, Daniel squeezed Rebecca's hand, his expression a mixture of pride and amusement. "You were magnificent," he told her. "Where did you learn to negotiate like that?" Rebecca smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "I taught the children of Boston's most successful merchants for 5 years, Daniel. You pick up a few things listening to their fathers discuss business at school functions." Their remaining days in Denver were filled with a combination of business and pleasure. They met again with Caldwell, who presented a revised proposal that, while not ideal, represented a significant improvement over the original terms. Daniel requested time to consult with a lawyer before signing any agreement, a prudent decision that William heartily endorsed. Between meetings, they explored the city together. Rebecca delighted in the bookstores, selecting new titles for the school library. Daniel purchased a fine new saddle he'd been eyeing for months, unavailable in their local town. They attended a theatrical performance one evening, Rebecca radiant in a new dress hastily altered by a local seamstress. On their final night in Denver, as they prepared for the journey home the following day, Rebecca noticed Daniel watching her with unusual intensity as she brushed her hair before bed. "What is it?" she asked, meeting his gaze in the mirror. "You're staring." Daniel crossed the room to stand behind her, his hands coming to rest gently on her shoulders. "I was just thinking how lucky I am. A year ago, I was a solitary rancher with no prospects for change. Now I have you brilliant, beautiful, brave Rebecca." She set down her brush and turned to face him, touched by his words. "I'm the fortunate one, Daniel. When that stagecoach left me behind, I thought my life was ending. Instead, it was just beginning." He pulled her close, his embrace conveying everything words could not: gratitude, desire, devotion. "When we return home," he murmured against her hair, "I think perhaps we might discuss that family we've been planning. Dr. Wilson's last report was encouraging." Rebecca's heart leaped at his words, hope blossoming in her chest. "Are you certain? My health is better every day," Daniel finished. "And life offers no guarantees, Rebecca. If this railroad business has taught me anything, it's that change comes whether we're ready or not. I'd rather embrace it on our terms, create the future we want, than wait for perfect circumstances that may never arrive." Rebecca reached up to touch his face, love overwhelming her. "Yes," she whispered, "let's start our family. Let's build our future, whatever it brings." Their return journey to the Double E was filled with renewed purpose and shared dreams. The railroad would come, changing their land in ways they couldn't fully anticipate, but they would face those changes together just as they would face the joys and challenges of building their family. As they crested the final hill overlooking the ranch, the familiar buildings nestled in the valley below, Rebecca felt a profound sense of homecoming. This place, once strange to her, had become the center of her world, the setting for a life she could never have imagined when she left Boston, ill and alone. "Home," Daniel said simply, echoing her thoughts. Rebecca nodded, remembering that terrible day when she had collapsed on the plains, coughing until her strength was gone, and the cowboy who carried her to safety in his saddle. "Home," she agreed, reaching for his hand. "Now and always." By the autumn of 1877, life at the Double E Ranch had adjusted to embrace new realities. Construction of the railroad spur had begun in late summer, proceeding along the modified route Rebecca had suggested. The compensation negotiated with the railroad company had enabled Daniel to purchase additional acreage to the north, expanding the ranch's operations and offsetting the land sacrificed to the tracks. Rebecca's school had reopened for the fall term with 15 students, the increased enrollment necessitating the hiring of an assistant teacher, Miss Clara Wilson, the doctor's niece, who had recently arrived from St. Louis. The two women worked well together, with Clara handling the younger children while Rebecca taught the more advanced students. Most significant of all the changes, however, was the one revealed on a crisp September morning when Rebecca emerged from the bedroom looking pale but radiant, her hand resting protectively over her still flat abdomen. "Dr. Wilson confirms it," she told Daniel, who had been watching her with increasing concern as morning sickness had plagued her for weeks. "We're expecting a child in April." Daniel's whoop of joy brought Mrs. Potts running from the kitchen, alarm on her face until she saw him swinging Rebecca in a gentle circle, both of them laughing. Understanding dawned immediately on the housekeeper's weathered features. "Well, it's about time," she declared, wiping her hands on her apron to hide her emotion. "This house needs the sound of little feet." Her expression sobered slightly as she addressed Rebecca. "Dr. Wilson's given you special instructions, I assume, with your health and all." Rebecca nodded, touched by the older woman's concern. "Rest, good nutrition, and moderation in all activities. He'll monitor me closely throughout." Daniel set Rebecca carefully on her feet, his expression a mixture of joy and concern. "You'll cut back on your teaching duties," he stated rather than asked. "Clara can take more responsibility." "I'll reduce my hours," Rebecca agreed, having anticipated his reaction. "But I won't stop completely, Daniel. Teaching gives me purpose and joy, which Dr. Wilson says is as important for the baby as physical rest." Daniel looked as if he might argue, but Mrs. Potts intervened with her practical wisdom. "The girl's right. Being useful keeps the spirits up. My sister had 6 healthy babies while running a millinery shop. It's idleness that breeds complications." In the end, a compromise was reached. Rebecca would continue teaching the older students 3 mornings a week, with Clara handling the remainder of the lessons. As her pregnancy progressed, this schedule would be adjusted as needed based on Dr. Wilson's recommendations. The news of their expected child spread quickly through the small community, bringing congratulations and offers of assistance. The neighboring women began planning a quilting bee to create a special blanket for the Evans baby, and Daniel's ranch hands discreetly started construction on a cradle, intended as a surprise gift. As autumn deepened toward winter, the railroad construction continued, now visible from the ranch house as tracks extended across their eastern boundary. Rebecca found the sight less disturbing than she had feared, a reminder of connection rather than intrusion, a link to the wider world their child would someday explore. Her pregnancy progressed well, the dreaded complications related to her consumption not materializing. Dr. Wilson expressed cautious optimism at each monthly examination, noting her continued overall improvement despite the additional demands pregnancy placed on her body. "You're stronger than you appear, Mrs. Evans," he remarked during a December visit, "and remarkably determined." Both excellent qualities for motherhood. The winter of 1877-1878 was milder than the previous year, allowing for easier travel and more frequent social interactions. The school remained open throughout the season, with Daniel insisting on escorting Rebecca on the short journey between home and classroom during the coldest days. Christmas brought a joyous celebration, with neighbors gathering at the Double E for a feast and gift exchange. Rebecca, now visibly pregnant at 5 months, glowed with health and happiness as she welcomed guests and directed the children in a simple pageant they had prepared at school. As the new year dawned, preparations for the baby's arrival intensified. The room adjacent to their bedroom was transformed into a nursery, painted a cheerful yellow and furnished with the cradle Daniel's men had crafted. A rocking chair Mrs. Potts contributed, and various practical items acquired from Denver or made by local hands. February brought the completion of the railroad spur, marked by a ceremonial driving of the final spike. Daniel and Rebecca attended the event, watching with mixed emotions as the first train traveled the newly laid tracks, its whistle echoing across land that had known only natural sounds for centuries. "Progress," Daniel murmured, his arm around Rebecca's shoulders. "For better or worse?" "For better, I think," Rebecca replied, her hand resting on her rounded abdomen where their child grew strong. "Our baby will know a world more connected than we did, with more opportunities." Daniel's hand covered hers, feeling the flutter of movement beneath. as long as he or she also knows the value of this land, the importance of roots and belonging. With you as a father, I have no doubt. As March arrived with its promise of spring, Rebecca's pregnancy entered its final weeks. Dr. Wilson increased his visits to weekly, monitoring mother and child with careful attention. Though Rebecca's consumption remained in check, the doctor maintained vigilant watch for any signs of relapse under the strain of impending childbirth. "You're doing remarkably well," he assured her during one such visit. "But childbirth is demanding even for women with no history of illness. I'll stay at the ranch when your time approaches, just to be certain." True to his word, Dr. Wilson moved into the guest room in early April as Rebecca entered her 9th month. His presence brought comfort to Daniel, whose concern grew more evident as the birth approached. Each night, he held Rebecca close, whispering hopes and dreams for their child while his hands traced protective patterns over her swollen belly. "Are you afraid?" he asked one night, voicing the question that had lingered between them. Rebecca considered before answering, her fingers laced with his. "Not of the birth itself," she said honestly. "But sometimes I wonder if I'll be strong enough afterward, if the consumption might return when I'm weakened from delivery and caring for an infant." Daniel's arms tightened around her. "If it does, we'll face it together. We have resources now we didn't have when you first arrived." Dr. Wilson's ongoing care, Mrs. Potts's assistance, neighbors willing to help. His voice lowered to a fierce whisper. "And my absolute determination not to lose you." Rebecca turned in his embrace, finding his lips in the darkness. "Then I won't be lost," she promised. "I'm too stubborn to leave you and our child." The baby announced its imminent arrival on a perfect spring morning, the 15th of April, 1878. Rebecca's water broke as she stood in the kitchen discussing the day's meals with Mrs. Potts, who reacted with immediate efficiency, sending a ranch hand to fetch Daniel from the north pasture, and another to alert Dr. Wilson, who had returned to town 2 days earlier. By the time Daniel galloped into the yard, Rebecca was settled in their bedroom, the initial pains beginning to establish their rhythm. The fear he had expected to feel was overridden by determination and a strange, calm certainty that all would be well. Dr. Wilson arrived within the hour, examining Rebecca with practiced hands before declaring everything progressing normally. "First babies often take their time, Mrs. Evans," he advised. "Try to rest between contractions. We may be at this well into the night." The doctor's prediction proved accurate. As afternoon stretched into evening, and then night, Rebecca labored with quiet determination, drawing on reserves of strength she had cultivated throughout her recovery from consumption. Daniel remained by her side, supporting her through each contraction, wiping her brow and murmuring encouragement when words failed her. As midnight approached, the labor intensified. Dr. Wilson positioned himself at the foot of the bed, Mrs. Potts assisting with experienced hands. "It's time to push with the next contraction, Mrs. Evans," the doctor instructed. "Your baby is ready to meet you." Rebecca gripped Daniel's hand with surprising strength as she bore down, her face contorted with effort. 3 intense pushes later, a lusty cry filled the room as their child slipped into the world. "A girl," Dr. Wilson announced, placing the squalling infant on Rebecca's chest. "A perfect little girl." Rebecca's tears flowed freely as she cradled their daughter, overwhelmed by love for this tiny being they had created. "Hello, little one," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We've been waiting for you." Daniel leaned close, one finger gently tracing the baby's flushed cheek. "She's beautiful," he breathed, "like her mother." As Mrs. Potts efficiently managed the afterbirth and Dr. Wilson completed his examination of both mother and child. Daniel and Rebecca remained in their own world, marveling at their daughter's perfection: 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, a cap of dark hair, and eyes that, when briefly opened, revealed the same sage green as Rebecca's. "What shall we call her?" Daniel asked, reluctant to release either his wife or daughter from his protective gaze. Rebecca studied the infant's face, considering the names they had discussed in recent months. "Elizabeth," she decided, "after your mother, Elizabeth Hope Evans." "Hope," Daniel repeated, understanding immediately the significance of the middle name. "Yes, perfect." Dr. Wilson pronounced both mother and child healthy, expressing particular satisfaction with Rebecca's condition after the rigors of childbirth. "No signs of respiratory distress," he noted. "Your lungs have held strong, Mrs. Evans. A very good sign indeed." Once the doctor and Mrs. Potts had left them alone, Rebecca leaned back against the pillows, exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath her eyes but profound contentment in her expression. "We did it," she murmured, gazing down at Elizabeth, who had fallen asleep at her breast. "We created a miracle." Daniel sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his arm encircling Rebecca's shoulders. "You did it," he corrected gently. "You fought for life when most would have surrendered. You rebuilt your strength when the odds were against you. You believed in our future when it seemed uncertain." He pressed a kiss to her temple, his voice thick with emotion. "And now you've given me the greatest gift imaginable, a daughter, and the promise of our family's continuation." Rebecca leaned into his embrace, their daughter cradled between them. "From the moment you found me on the plains, we've been building this life together, step by step. Elizabeth is just the next chapter in our story." As dawn broke over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the small family remained huddled together in the quiet sanctuary of their bedroom. Outside, the ranch stirred to life, cattle lowing in the distance, horses nickering for their morning feed, ranch hands beginning their daily tasks. The sound of a train whistle echoed faintly from the new tracks, a reminder of the changing world into which Elizabeth Hope Evans had been born. Inside, Rebecca gazed at her sleeping daughter and the man who had saved her life in more ways than one. The consumption that had driven her west had brought her not to death, but to life in its fullest measure, to love, to purpose, to family. Whatever challenges the future might hold, she would face them with the same determination that had carried her through the darkest days of her illness. She thought back to that desperate day on the plains when she had coughed until her strength was gone, and the cowboy carried her to safety in his saddle. How could she have known then that his strong arms would become her home, his ranch her sanctuary, his love her salvation? "What are you thinking?" Daniel asked softly, noting her contemplative expression. Rebecca smiled, her heart full beyond measure. "That sometimes the end of one journey is just the beginning of a far greater adventure." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes as he gazed at his wife and daughter, the family he had never expected to have, the love he had never dared to hope for. "And our adventure is just beginning," he promised, sealing the words with a tender kiss as the new day dawned bright with possibility.